Describe the Space Shuttle's disaster. What happened, why, and who was involved? NASA's Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart into many pieces on January 28, 1986, just 72 seconds after liftoff. This resulted in the deaths of all 7 of the crew members. The shuttle was launched from the Kennedy Space Center on the mission STS-51L and ascended normally in the beginning. However, once it passed the maximum aerodynamic pressure, the shuttle then experienced a catastrophic failure traced to the right solid rocket booster, also known as SRB. The booster's O-rings are rubber seals designed to prevent the hot combustion gases from escaping between segments of the SRB. This had failed due to the unusual cold temperatures on that morning of the launch. The freezing temperatures caused the O-ring to go stiff and unable to seal the combustion gases properly. So as the rocket ignited and the hot gases leaked through the weak joint, it eventually began to burn through the external fuel tank, leading to the structural breakdown of the shuttle and ultimately to its destruction. Millions of people watched as the destruction happened due to the publicity that Krista McAuliffe's mission brought. This program brought much national pride and attention to the launch. Following the disaster, the Rogers Commission investigation revealed significant organizational and communicational failures within NASA and the SRB contractor, Morton Thiokol. The engineers at Thiokol had sent a warning that the cold temperatures posed a serious risk for the O-rings and had recommended delaying the launch. However, due to some schedule pressure and communication breakdown, NASA management overrode the concerns and proceeded to continue the launch. The commission concluded that the flawed decision-making pressures from the public, maintaining a rapid launch schedule, and accepting known problems were all contributing factors to the disaster. Question 2. Who were the stakeholders? What do you believe is the motivation of each of these stakeholders? The major stakeholder in the Challenger disaster were NASA management, their engineers, Morton Thiokol management and their engineers, and the 7 crew members. Most importantly, the crew members whose lives were lost were the highest stakeholders and were motivated by their professional duty and the trust that they had in NASA's safety decisions to keep their safety first. The NASA management was motivated by the schedule pressure due to the desire to demonstrate the shuttle's program's reliability. They wanted to show that they were on time and to meet political expectations to maintain frequent launches. NASA's engineers and Thiokol engineers were motivated primarily by safety and data showing that the O-rings were unsafe in colder temperatures. They had proven that they were faulty, and yet NASA's management looked past these defects to stay on time. Morton Thiokol management was motivated by preserving their contract with NASA and avoiding conflict with them. This led them to approve the launch despite knowing the engineering concerns. Lastly, the American public had some motivation as well. With millions of students watching Krista McAuliffe's mission, many were full of pride and expectations that NASA would ensure safety for the mission, causing additional pressure on NASA. Question 3. Were there ethical issues involved in engineering design that led to the disaster? Yes, there were significant ethical issues that were directly tied to the engineering design of the Challenger's SRB, especially the O-ring seal system. The engineers at Morton Thiokol had long documented that the O-rings were vulnerable to erosion and loss of flexibility in cold temperatures. The SRB joint did not reliably perform in code under all expected operating conditions. Ethically, this was very wrong. This was a very wrong call. A known design flaw that could and did threaten a human life was continued to be used to prioritizing schedule pressures over engineering safety principles. The ethical correct thing to do was to push the date and to find an alternative sealant ring for the SRB. Their decision violated core ethical engineering standards, including the duty to protect public safety, the reliability to report and act on known hazards, and delay the liftoff schedule to ensure safety for all people involved. The failure to redesign or delay the mission despite the known design limitations was not only a technical failure, but also an ethical one, rooted in ignoring safety concerns for an organizational convenience. Question 4. Were there ethical issues involved in management or the response of engineers to management? in general or specific to this particular property that led to the disaster? Yes, there were major ethical issues in management and the handling of engineering warnings in the Challenger disaster. NASA and Morton management ignored the explicit engineering concerns for the launch of freezing temperatures. Although the TCOL engineers presented the data showing that the faulty O-rings were likely to fail in cold weather, instead of prioritizing safety, the managers were influenced by schedule pressures, political expectations, and the pressure of maintaining a reputation for frequent launches. They put 7 lives at risk when they chose reputation over safety, which led to all 7 losing their lives. When engineers initially recommended delaying the launch, TCOL management overrode them once NASA questioned their decision, creating tension between the two. This created an environment where legitimate safety concerns were suppressed, violating the fundamental engineering ethics and obligations for public safety, and crew safety above all else. The failure to heed the warning from the engineers, combined the pressure placed on engineers to reverse their recommendation, was an exponential ethical breakdown that led to the disaster.
I will be answering questions 5, 6, and 7. The first question is, as a result of any ethical or professional shortcomings that you have described in the subsequent outcomes that resulted, what was the environmental impact? Due to NASA's ignorance towards the engineers' warnings, the shuttle exploded and littered debris all over the surrounding environment. The linearly shaped charges scattered the debris from the SRBs over a considerably large area, starting at 486 square nautical miles. There were a total of 881 recorded potential locations for fallen debris, which took several months to search. The biggest and most obvious environmental impact was the sheer amount of debris that fell into the ocean. In addition to the metals and structural components of the shuttle, a lot of foreign chemicals were introduced into the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. One example is the solid propellant, which posed a particular risk because it becomes more volatile when submerged. Another environmental impact was the emissions released by the vehicles used to survey and scavenge for debris. During the peak of recovery, there were at least 12 aircraft, 16 ships, and several submarines deployed to look for debris. Each of those vehicles released pollutants into the atmosphere and therefore impact the environment. By the end of the search, approximately 54,000 pounds of debris were found but never recovered, and an additional 40,226 pounds was never found nor recovered. That means there is approximately 94,226 pounds of materials still scattered throughout the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The next question is, as a result of any ethical or professional shortcomings that you have described in the subsequent outcomes that resulted, what was the economic impact? Following the disaster, NASA implemented a series of design changes and repairs to the space shuttle. Spacecraft construction and the research and materials needed to pull off space travel cost a considerable amount of money, resulting in an economic impact. To address the major cause of the disaster, NASA added heaters to help maintain the temperature of the O-rings so that they would no longer stiffen up. They also added measures to prevent joint rotation of the clevis, and other O-rings were added to seal the empty space between the clevis and the capture feature. During the initial design process, the design team considered adding an escape option to the shuttle for operational flights. Due to the high cost and complexity, the idea was discarded. But after the Challenger's tragic failure, the design team decided to implement an escape option anyway, despite the price. While this is a positive change, it also added to the overall cost of the redesign. By the end of it all, the shuttle was renamed to the redesigned Solid Rocket Monitor, or the RSRM. The last question is, what global impact did the outcome have? Were there any policies that may have resulted, for example? Several policies that were involved in the Challenger's launch were changed after the disaster took place. The first thing to note is the increase in safety standards that NASA added to its space shuttle components. They updated the critical items list and failure modes for the SSMEs and implemented 18 hardware changes. Several practical standards were adjusted as well. For example, NASA limited the maximum thrust of SSMEs to 104% and improved the steering and handling of the landing gear. Also, there was an addition of the escape option that was mentioned earlier. A new Office of Safety, Reliability, and Quality Assurance was put into place by NASA, and the former Challenger flight director became chief of the safety division of the directorate. One of the people who was sent up in the Challenger was part of the Teachers in Space program. Due to their tragic death, the program was shut down and replaced by the Educators Astronaut Project. Instead of having the teachers join for a short amount of time and then returning to their classrooms after landing, the new program required the teachers to become professionally trained as mission specialists. The teacher who was selected for the new program ended up joining astronaut group number 17 and flying in the STS-118, which helped deliver and assemble parts of the International Space Station.
Question 8 asks, as a result of any ethical or professional shortcomings that you have described and the subsequent outcomes that resulted, what was the societal impact? The societal impact of the Challenger disaster was that it led NASA to establish the Office of Safety, Reliability, and Quality Assurance, which was created in order to ensure the safety of future NASA activities. This program would also ensure that NASA would become compliant with policies and standards and be responsible for using technology that would improve the safety as well as reliability of missions. Another societal impact of Challenger disaster is that the issues that led to the disaster have been used as an important case study for engineers because of how it illustrates the effects of poor group decision making and led to the discussion of engineering ethics. In addition to the Challenger disaster being used as an engineering case study, engineers from Warren Thiokol, Alan McDonald, and Roger Boyce-Jolly will become advocates of having responsible workplace decisions and the ethics of engineering. They would be speakers on these topics because of their negative experience with others involved in the decision-making of the Challenger. The event of the Challenger disaster caused the government to criticize NASA's decision-making processes that led to the disaster and resulted in the 32-month hiatus of the Space Shuttle program. The Challenger disaster would also cause several memorials to be created, which would honor those who died during the launch, and the event would be remembered as a tragedy of NASA's space program. Question 9 asks, which of the fundamental canons, rules of practice, or professional obligations as specified by the NSPE Code of Ethics would have been relevant in dictating the behavior of the engineers, serving as engineers or in engineering management? Discuss why those sections of the NSPE Code of Ethics are relevant for this case. The professional obligations that would have been relevant in dictating the behavior of the engineers are, quote, engineers shall be guided in all their relations by the highest standards of honesty and integrity, end quote, and, quote, engineers shall at all times strive to serve the public interest, end quote. Additionally, the following statement in the rules of practice, quote, engineers shall avoid deceptive acts, end quote, would have also been relevant to this case as well. The first professional obligation from the NSPE Code of Ethics is relevant to the Challenger disaster because of how the Warren Thiokol engineers involved should have continued to be honest about the issues of the O-rings and stand by their decision to delay the launch. Their decision to proceed with the launch goes against the integrity of an engineer, which should have been their priority instead. In relation to prioritizing integrity, the second professional obligation of the NSPE Code of Ethics is also relevant to this case because of how the lives of those boarding on the space shuttle should have been taken into consideration and are an essential part of the issues of the decision-making by the engineers. The engineers should have taken responsibility for any decisions that would have risked the lives of those on the space shuttle, and any decision should have been in the best interest of the passengers instead of their own. Due to the engineers' negligence of the public interest, those on board lost their lives, and if they had been taken into account, their lives could have been saved. Finally, the last statement from the rules of practice is also relevant to the case because of how the engineers were deceptive in the performance of the O-rings since they had known there were issues but continued to proceed with the launch. They would also be deceptive in the discussion that was held about the O-rings and would not mention the discussion to the NASA Mission Management Team Leader Arnold Aldrich. If the Warren Thiokol engineers had avoided deceiving those in powers about these issues with the O-rings, it could have allowed a re-examination of the space shuttle or would have delayed the launch. Question 10 asks, based on the NSP canons and the environmental, economic, global, and societal issues at stake, what were the professional responsibilities of the engineers involved in the space shuttle disaster? What engineering decisions should have been made? The professional responsibilities of the engineers involved in the space shuttle disaster is to ensure the safety of those on the Challenger space shuttle and to be honest about the issues of the design of the space shuttle, as well as having integrity and to place ethics above any decisions being made. In relation to the engineers making decisions, some of the decisions that should have been made would include implementing a system that would allow for multiple tests to be made from various groups of engineers. These tests would all have to pass before proceeding with the launch of a space shuttle. In addition to having multiple tests, all the engineers would have to come to agreements about the safety and successfulness of the mission, which would also require research to back up these claims. There would also be stricter rules that would restructure the power that people in the organization have and prevent a single person from pushing forward with a mission if multiple people have come to the conclusion that it is not safe to proceed. By having multiple checks being made for a space shuttle, it would prevent a mission from going through if the results of an initial test is not satisfactory. This would also save costs because it would allow for only one part to be repaired rather than spending money on repairing the whole space shuttle due to a disaster. Additionally, allowing for multiple people to regulate and implement safety standards would also prevent any unsafe missions to occur because there would be more people to give their input about any issues and would have to come into agreement about proceeding with a launch. These decisions would have to comply with the NSPE Code of Ethics, and any violation of these codes would result in loss of employment. This would also prevent a person from pressuring other members into submitting to a decision that benefits them instead of the public as a whole. Although it could be argued there were already multiple engineers who were vocal about their opinions against proceeding with the Challenger launch, an issue that arose is that they had ultimately changed their decisions and had agreed to the demands of NASA SRB project manager Lawrence Malloy, rather than continuing to stand by their initial concerns and put the lives of the passengers as a priority. By having stricter rules and regulations, it would prevent unethical decisions from taking place and give less power to those who are willing to knowingly put the lives of others in danger.